Here we are, episode 14 of A Dose of Sinsanity. I am GR3, joined by Jamokin and Welshie, and we have yet another special guest with Scurvy Dog, a member of Pot of Sloth and Pot of Vainglory. And we're really excited to have him on as we get a different insight of a way to look at Dota and honestly just overall team management and really the psychological aspect of it and communication and things along those lines. Super excited to have you here. Why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself for us?
Yeah, thanks. So I go by Scurvy Dog. I'm a huge, longtime Dota fan. I've played Dota for over 10,000 hours, 8,000 games, and my background is in industrial psychology, but specifically, I do my research on team synergy and team communication elements. And for work right now, I basically develop training uh, regimens for the corporate world. So, how to train managers, train different occupations, stuff like that.
Yeah, we're super excited to see and listen of how you bring what you do on a daily basis and what you've studied and researched and how that translates into the team aspect of Dota. We've talked a good amount about this, and I was super excited when you were discussing this with me, and I really wanted to bring you on to talk about it. But before we really dive in, I've got to ask because another conversation that we had that was super interesting. Now, your profile picture is that of an egg, and I
Yeah.
asked you a bit why the heck that is. Do you want to go ahead and share that with us?
So back in middle school, I played video games my entire life, but back in middle school when I kind of went from just a gaming hobbyist to like I sat down and I decided that I wanted to be the best at StarCraft 2. And I'm gonna have a moment of vulnerability with you guys. There would be weekends where I would play 16 hours of StarCraft, but I got good enough to where I was joining tournaments online. I started winning, and I joined a Korean organization back in the day, and the nickname that they gave me was Egg. And I guess for me, the profile picture is kind of a tribute to that.
Now, why did they give you the nickname of Egg? Because it was super interesting.
Uh, so they thought it was funny because I was the best American player that they knew of. So there's kind of a inside joke with that.
Yeah, I feel you. Now let's talk about your past a little bit and your past experience. Now you
Mhm.
started with StarCraft, correct? And from what
Yes.
I understand, you have a group of guys that transitioned from StarCraft and really moved into Dota as a squad, correct?
Mm.
Now, I believe this was basically the majority of Waste of Time that currently plays in 82L. Yes?
Uh, we So the 82L team is there's a couple guys on there that aren't a part of the kind of the original squad, but we're kind of one big friend group. So the Waste of Time 82L team and Pot of Vainglory is we're all one big friend group, and we play together all the time.
Right. And for reference, the Pot of Vainglory is our MD2L team. Our first season that Pot of Sens has sent a team for MD2L, and we're super excited, and they are absolutely freaking crushing it. So if you guys haven't taken a look at some of their games, please check them out. They're very exciting to watch. Now, with your Pot of Vainglory team and then your
Hmm.
previous teams with Waste of Time that I believe was in C-Dub, you were
Hmm.
the captain. And
Yeah.
you were explaining that you applied all of these wonderful ideas that we're going to hear about shortly. And you're moving that into really into your whole team aspect.
Hmm.
How did it translate into Pot of Sloth, um, where you left the captain slot? Was there
Hmm.
any transition when you were talking to the team, or was it kind of just take a backseat, see how other people run it, or how did that work out for you?
Uh, yeah. For me, I've filled many different leadership roles, and from my background in because I guess even in my undergrad as a psychology major, I was taking a lot of the basically graduate electives as undergrad or graduate courses as undergraduate electives, and I've always been very critical of myself about like how can I like what's the maximum thing I could bring to a team. And so I've really learned just from my own experience as well as really like the scholastic element of it, like what identifying what my role is and just filling my role to the best I can. In the case of like the teams that I'm a captain of, that's filling a lot of the responsibilities of a captain. But for Pot of Sloth, I wasn't a captain, a king or decisive king, another player was. So for me, I just wanted to be a player and a teammate and focus on that and try my best to add as much as I can without kind of usurping that role from king.
Makes sense.
Was that a bit
right.
of adjustment, or was that kind of like a breath of fresh air?
Uh, in many ways, it's a breath of fresh air because I like to take on more responsibility than what's expected of me when I'm in that captain position, and it is kind of a relief not being in that position. But I definitely try and offer as much of my thoughts on what I think can improve the most. But that's kind of like where I stop myself. I offer my thoughts, what I think we need as a team, what he could, potentially do better as a captain. But like beyond that, there's no like expectation that he does anything. Just because, that's not really, my role, my position, like in that context.
You were just more focused on being a good teammate.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Awesome.
And so, since you have captained, correct, and been a player, what would you
Yeah.
say are two of the what are like two of the main differences? Like, how does your approach change?
As a captain, I guess I take a degree of responsibility for the team performance overall, and I think about what elements can I kind of advocate for my role as a captain that could improve the team performance in both like the context of winning, but I think also in the context of just like how much the team is just like enjoying playing together. Because at the end of the day, my biggest focus, both as a captain and as a player, is I want the team to actually have fun and have as much fun as possible, and I want to have fun because I think in so many components of life, like that's so critically important. So as a captain, I take it as my responsibility to like work out disputes between players and whatnot, and implement my knowledge to address individual issues as well as like team issues. And then in my role as a player, I try and put all my attention on just my individual play and just kind of giving tidbits, thoughts, 2 cents here and there to perhaps give suggestions on like to steer those conversations or maybe facilitate those conversations on teams that I'm not the captain of, because I don't want to be like, hey guys, I think we should talk about X, Y, or Z, because that's not my role on a team that I'm not a captain on.
And so then, just to kind of diverge from Dota a bit, you talked about your schooling, and so what kind of places, like after school or like maybe internships or whatever, but like where have you kind of worked in the field of psychology? What are some projects you've worked on?
So a lot of the work as far as the actual like field of psychology was done in like during my tenure in graduate school, where I did research, published papers and whatnot, and then postgraduate school. So my degree being in industrial psychology, it's really it's the application of psychology to the corporate workplace to help the workplace run as efficiently as possible, to help the company make more money, but to also make the work experience of the employees as positive and healthy as possible. So post grad school, I've just been working in industry, and right out of grad school, I took up a job as a medical writer, but from there I went to be a talent development consultant, and now I work for a company where I basically am the director of developing and facilitating all the training that goes on in the company.
So that's interesting to me because I'm interested to hear kind of, well, given that you've entered the workforce in, like, the year of 2020 when everybody was doing the whole work from home thing, and
Mm-hmm.
not to get too much on a tangent, but I'm sure this is a question you get asked 100 times. What kind of effect had the pandemic, as well as just kind of working from home, had on people? Would you say, like, did it have a big impact on kind of like the mentality and like the morale of work?
Absolutely. And I think the work itself transitioned easy enough because ultimately corporations are just social bodies that like I guess, from, my training, I look at a corporation as just like, a social body. And even in the context of law, they look at corporations as like a person that isn't a human, but like I said, to not go off on a tangent, corporations are always going to do their best to be productive, make money, because that's what they're built and designed to do. And so the work itself transitioned, right? But the
Mhm.
individuals behind that work, that transition was very, very difficult because it completely uprooted a routine that an entire world of people were accustomed to. And basically everyone had to completely readjust, for the most part, for the most part, everyone had to completely readjust like what that core element of their life was composed of. And that went from commuting, going to work, to doing all that at home. And even to be on work, everything social about our lives changed. So we had to like, download like that weird party room app to like, have group hangouts like during COVID, like in your room and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like it was crazy.
Oh, fair.
I'm curious on like the effect that had on your job as well. So you talked about a large part is making sure that the workplace is happy with
Hmm.
where they're at and the communication and stuff like between that. Um, was that a lot of stress and a lot of change for you to where I'm sure there was a lot of virtual type things? Uh, how was that transition where you can see everybody on a daily basis and you're working in a large group, but now all of a sudden everything's virtual?
It I think the biggest challenge was going from having those meetings in person to having those meetings through Zoom or Skype or whatever medium you know people ended up using. But in my context, it was Zoom because ultimately a in-person meeting is very different, and they could be equally as productive. But people just need to one, adjust, but also just to learn like how can we use this new medium potentially, you know as an advantage, or at least like how can we maximize this new medium that we're forced to use now. So for me, in the job that I do, I work with other people who have background in social science. So people are familiar with the ideas, the zeitgeist, like the a lot of social scientists are in
Mhm.
the loop about a lot of the same things. So communication is easy there, but a lot of the other departments where none of their background is in nothing social science at all. I know a lot of the other departments had a lot more difficult times than what I had, but it's kind of nice for me because because like my job went from being in the office to now I'm completely virtual, and it's great for me because I think I realized, and the corporate, I mean my corporation, but a lot of corporations really realize like what needs to be done at the office and what doesn't have to be done there.
So quickly to keep on the topic of your work experience and stuff, where are some notable places you've worked, if any?
So my first job out of grad school, I worked as basically a scientific writer for one of the hospitals, but and I ended up working for a different hospital in Oklahoma, for the talent development and or a talent development consultant, and in that role, my focus one was to basically develop programs that maximize the that grew people like in the roles that they have. So like one of the big pillars of corporations is like acquiring talent, right? And then once you have that talent, like how do you retain them and how do you develop them? And both of those are important because acquiring talent, developing talent are very very expensive. And the last thing that you want to have happen is for that for those people that you hire, you train, for them just to bail and go someplace else. So the talent development things that I focused on were things that basically helped them progress higher, into the hierarchy, of the corporate hospital, context, to put them in roles that they would be successful at, that they're happy with, and to make sure that they're acquiring skills where they feel both fulfilled in the context of, work and like, fiscally, personally, financially.
Okay. So kind of moving on to, I guess I kind of want to ask a blunt question here of, I guess how would you say important team communication is? Obviously, it's very important, but are there aspects of it that people don't realize that show how important team communication really is, either in a Dota setting or in a work environment? Like, is there something that you've really found in your work that's really surprised you as, wow, this makes a huge difference in ways people don't realize?
So in the context of just work and a work in general, I think that just having positive communication, like learn to be so this is actually really really interesting.
Hmm?
I think that clinical counseling training, it it I think it's cool because the reason why I bring this up is because the focus of that is just learning how to empathize, communicate, and connect with people. And and in the context of counseling, it's helping people live better lives, right? But it's so interesting because the core of that is just learning to empathize, how to make people feel comfortable, and all that. And I think it's so interesting because I think that is one of the most transferable skills into any context, because anything you do is going to be with people. And I think in the context of like my work, people just need to learn how to empathize with people, how to be amicable. And because a lot of times there's just a lot of this hostility for no reason. And when there's like this there's this trust in your social sphere, and when that's shattered, it makes working really difficult. It makes people miserable so quickly.
Oh, absolutely. I know
And
that when I was working in a couple of fields, I know that I worked for a couple of companies where the only kind of communication you really got was negative communication.
mm-hmm.
And that was a really like kind of back-breaking, soul-breaking kind of thing where it's just like,
Yeah.
hey, I don't hear shit when I'm doing my job great, but the moment that something's going wrong, all I get is like, hey, you messed this up, go fix it. And it's like, well, thanks, bud. Good to know that all you pay attention to is my mistakes, and that's all I can really expect.
So we call that social safety. And in the context of Dota itself, that social safety element is huge, but also in the context of Dota, just good communication in general is so critical when it comes to like efficient information sharing, and like how information is shared with everyone within the team.
Yeah, I've definitely noticed, like, even in pubs, I've noticed a difference, like, of just team morale. Of I try to be the person who, like, if someone does something badass or does something that is remarkable, I try to, like, I tip them. I like be positive. I'm like, way to go, dude! Like, awesome play. And then those pubs, everyone has them. It's dead silent. Nobody says anything to each other. And then somebody makes a mistake of some kind, and there's just mass pinging happening and report this person. And it's like,
classic.
Oh, the classic pub, right?
And we got in a conversation too, kind of similar to that, when we were talking prior to the season, where we use that sandwich kind of deal when communicating with teams. Like, some people just don't take negative or not just constructive criticism hardly at all, because a lot of times they're thinking, oh, we're just gonna attack, and then people just, they get down on themselves, they don't want to be around it. And then we kind of talked about that sandwich aspect of saying, oh, this was really great, this was shit, but good job. like in that
compliment
kind of
sandwich.
form, the compliment sandwich. It just translates so well into that kind of form in Dota.
Mm-hmm. I think a lot of it is like building that rapport, a positive rapport initially, so they're more open to the criticism that might come later on.
So it starts with having like a base level of respect, basically, of like, and like feeling like you trust this person's opinion and this person's kind of guidance, and that they're going to be giving you good input, right? Not that some dude off the street who's just here tearing apart your game, right?
Yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense. It's particularly interesting because we've had insight into kind of like even pro team management with Fu, who did an interview with us, and he was talking about how sometimes his role was kind of just team mom, right? Where he was, I mean, he puts it that way, but it really is like he had to, like, when people are freaking out, he's the one who had to like calm them down and like bring them back to that place. And like you're saying, apathy, right? Or if I'm using the word right there, like, you know, he had to be very empathetic to this person and what they're going through and like what's going on, and to get them to calm down and chill out. And like you said, build that trust, right? Everyone on the team has to trust you because they have to come to you with those issues.
Yeah.
So I think it's very interesting to see that like these I mean, I guess it makes sense, right? Teamwork is the same in both, like, even in sports as it is in kind of like the office environment, which is what you study. Has that been interesting for you, by the way? Kind of, you see this in like, have you ever looked at it in like a sports way, like beyond even, you would say, like esports? Have you looked at like kind of how like teams in like professional sports communicate and done any kind of like research or studies on that?
Absolutely. And like, so I've been an athlete my entire life. I even see it in like the sports that, you know, that I was playing growing up. And growing up, I didn't really necessarily think of it in the context that I do now, but like being able to like reflect back on it. So much of the just skill as the collective team was just in what the social dynamic was like. And sometimes I was part of some teams that should have been better than some of my previous teams, but we just performed so much worse because everyone thought they were the hottest thing and no one worked together at all.
Yeah, which is that's another thing that Fu talked about, right? Is that like you'd think in Dota, if you took the top 5 people in each one of their positions, right, as far as MMR goes, and by MMR is the only reference we really have to what is to skill. If we took everyone, the top position in every team, that may not necessarily be the best team in the region. They may not even place, because it's not all about skill. It's not all about
New York Yankees.
Yeah.
Well, Team Secret came to mind as well, and how they've never really been in contention for an international title.
I take offense to that, but yeah, that's fair.
I always use that same example for the New York Yankees. Now this season they're doing phenomenal and they're just a bunch of badasses. But after the 90s, they kind of got into this part of, we were going to get the best players and pay all this money for the best guys, and we're going to put them on the field and we're going to win a ton of World Series, and it never fucking worked. Like, it was just the idea of, you put all these superstars, you see it a little bit with EG actually, but you put all these superstars on the same team and they're pub stompers and things like this, and ideally you're like, this team's going to be the best, they should win everything because they got the highest MMR, the highest all this, and it just doesn't fit because the team can't communicate with each other. There's too many egos. And I think we see this a lot with like, we're seeing it right now in MD2L. I wouldn't say, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but Pot of Vainglory isn't the highest MMR team. But you guys are successful because your communication and the way you play together is so good. And like, it's the same with Kerchu, like in Champions League right now. They're not the highest MMR team, but you watch any of their games and it's just quick. You could tell they're communicating. They're all on the same page. And that itself leads to success.
For Vainglory, we are the 3rd lowest MMR team, and we're like 4,000 MMR below cap compared to the other teams in the league. But I'd say we're one of the best teams.
It's, I mean, I hate to say it, but like the stick out to me is always like, I love this, but like you look at the amount of talent that like our tour, like RTZ has been on, like the amount of talented teams he's been with, and you see him in any of his streams, and I refuse to believe that man is much different on like a professional scene side. Like I do believe that there's just players out there who are like they can be the best mechanical player you've ever seen, but their mentality is going to poison it. Who was the one who was like talked a lot about that with? Who was it? Who like flips shit? What was his name?
Sumail?
Sumail.
Shit all the time?
Yeah, like Sumail is like the arguably the best Dota player, period. Right?
Mm-hmm.
But the truth is that at the same time, the dude flames and he like is a very toxic teammate. So he's poison.
He can't figure out how to stay on a team. He just bounces around
Yeah.
because he can't be a teammate.
Yeah.
That does lead into the next thing I wanted to ask you. So during our conversation prior to this, you talked about 3 different levels of communications
Mhm.
within the game. Why don't you tell us about those? Because that was like through our entire conversation, that was the thing that really stuck out to me. Like, wow, this is really interesting in the way that you take this, break it down, and work on it with your team, and how well, and it shows how well it actually shows and proves your team.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the 3 levels that I break it down into is the nonverbal communication, and that really being like reading the body language of the hero avatars on on your team. And the reason why this is important is because there's gonna be parts, some spurts during the game where you literally cannot verbalize anything, and this is mostly like during a team fight. Like a team fight's happening, everything is 3 things are happening every second. You can't say, hey, Lion used, Spike, he used Hex. Like, you just have to just, see things, see positioning, and just read just what's happening in front of you. So, and that's all completely nonverbal. So there's the nonverbal element. There's more quick-witted communication, and this kind of a hybrid thing where it's kind of like short little snippets during some downtime, or maybe during a team fight. If I'm playing as an ancient apparition, I have my shard. I dump my my vortex beneath the Tide Hunter, and I cancels blink. That's huge, and I'm gonna say blink. Tide blink cancel, because that's gonna completely transform the way my team can now approach that team fight. Just with that, and then after that, it's more there is a long-winded communication, and this is definitely during periods of downtime where you kind of want to talk about more overarching macro things that's going on like during the game. So things like how is the or how is the enemy team winning fights? Like how are they approaching it, and what is happening in succession? What's the enemy team's game plan? How are they going to win this game? How are we coming along on our game plan? What is our win condition? Does anything need to change? Like, and those are things that when everyone's kind of split up in farming, that's when you have the time to discuss those more macro level ideas.
Yeah, that especially with newer teams, I think is where
Mhm.
you see the majority of like the cloudiness, and where players fail to really separate these deals. They might say, or they might not even say at all, if they got an alt up or they cancel, say like a Sand King Epi, or cancel Tide Blink or Blink, it's I just cancel the Tide Blink, or and just yelling that, and it clouds all the other communication that you need in a fight.
Yeah.
There's like you're saying, there's such little time that you have to communicate within a fight. Sometimes these
Yeah.
fights only go 4, 5, 6 seconds.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes they go a little longer, but ultimately it's a lot of stuff going on at one little like window of time in the greater scheme of a game that's not uncommon to go 45 minutes to an hour.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think that especially the nonverbal or like the quick win stuff, I think
Mhm.
it's so important to really discuss that with the team and
Yeah.
where that's going to go.
I mean, I think
And
the best example for like those nonverbal moments, and like if you play in a side lane, like the deal. You see your teammate like position in a way, or the enemy support like steps ever out of position, and like you have to be going on that guy before like you can even say the word go. Otherwise, like the
yes.
moment's gone, the kill's gone.
Mm-hmm.
Or like you're just about to go, and then your support turns around and like is gonna go stat the camp, and now you feed, and you're like, well, crap. So I definitely think those nonverbal moments are some of the most important ones.
They are, and I feel like the amount of them changes based on your skill level, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like the higher up you are, the more that there's nonverbal stuff that everybody does, and the lower you get, the more you kind of have to, especially a higher level player playing with a lower level, you have to tell them what you're doing or what they need to be doing or what's going on.
That's the value in lane partners too that you really see. Discussion to bring up Fu again that I had with him today was when you have lane partners, there's different ways of playing Dota, and they have to understand together what that looks like. Now, for me and Welshie, we have laned together for a long, long, long time.
Yep.
And it's got to the point where we would say he's stepping up, and then it would just be instant. Or I'm doing this, and we know this is going to cause this, and then we can go. When you get it's important to build that kind of rapport with whoever your lane partner is. So that nonverbal type stuff that Jamokin was speaking of, where there's that short window of time, and if you miss that because you have to explain it, then you miss that opportunity. And that could sometimes be the difference in, well, we just killed this guy, he TP'd back, and now I got their carry out of lane for over a minute. And that's the difference in winning or losing a lane. The nonverbal stuff, my God, is that important.
And I agree. Like even missing one kill during the laning stage is just so delicate, especially the higher MMR you go. And missing out on something like that could be huge.
Oh, absolutely. So tell me, I know that you and Vainglory have been kind of practicing together quite a bit. What does that look like for you? Like, how often are you guys practicing together?
During our time, during our formation, there was definitely much more of a, I guess, structure to the training where we were trying to do like, a scrim. If we did a scrim 1 week, then we kind of do some of our social training on the off week. And it kind of like, it followed that pattern. And now it, in the context of like, Vainglory and our current like status quo, it's, if we don't have a scrim set up, do we feel the need to do it? What do we need to work on? And a lot of times we can kind of expedite a lot of the, training because, we're familiar with it. We are used to the conversations that, are being had and stuff like that. But in general, it's on a need basis, at least at the point where we're at. And, I think the team's pretty, bought into it. So everything is very like facilitated at this point.
I gotcha. So how do you identify like a need when you say you need basis? Like, what do you mean that you need it? Like, what is the need per se?
So for example, like one, as a captain, I would want everyone to be, playing Dota, as much as me. But in my role as a captain, like the biggest thing for me is I just want everyone to have fun. And if someone isn't playing Dota as often and their performance is kind of starting to reflect that on both a like Dota performance level, but also in our training, one of the things that we train, and I'm gonna drop a super sciencey term, but a transactive memory system. The transactive memory system being like kind of our teams set expectations on like who's communicating what, right? So let alone is his actual Dota performance kind of falling off. He's also not kind of filling his role in what we expect him to communicate, right? So that leads to frustration naturally, and it's in a context of like like that of okay, he isn't playing as often. We definitely, I mean, I don't know about you guys, but I felt some tension there. It was very frustrating for me. We need to talk about you know, and include the entire team in this conversation. Like, what do we need to change? And how can we adapt to the, where we are now with everything, right? Because, the last thing that you want is that social safety and that cohesion being impaired.
I gotcha. So when those kinds of moments happen? Like, I mean, I hate to say it, but like we do have those moments in every one of the teams where just someone has, unfortunately for a game or two, just kind of dropped the ball, or like you're saying now, like a player has just like he's just not been getting on and not been doing what is like kind of, I wouldn't say his part, I wouldn't say it's what was expecting of him, but he's not really living up to hopefully what was going on before, or the average of what was going on before. You know, like he just didn't show up to practices. How, as a captain and in your kind of social eye, do you deal with that problem of like not so much a team problem, but like say there's a particular player that you see as like kind of the what's the word I'm looking for here, the just that he's having the problem, right? He's having some issue, or there seems to be some lag in what that player is doing. Like, how do you deal with that? How do you address it?
You know, there is the component of like, they are on the team and they are going to feel an amount of social pressure to stick it out with the team and whatnot, right? So I usually start that conversation with approaching them, hopefully in a Discord call, but if not, talking to them privately and just like, hey, I noticed you haven't been playing as much. I also noticed that, some things that I felt like you should have, called out, that you should have communicated, wasn't called out. Like, what's your relationship with Dota, like, currently, standing at right now, and just kind of approaching it that way. But, and eventually just like, depending on like, where that conversation goes. But I guess whether I'm asking this just point blank or I'm, trying to fill that out, my goal is, is this something that you even want to do? Because ultimately, if you don't want to do this, if you feel the pressure to do this when you don't really want to, I don't want you on the team, right? If you would rather just not be doing it at all.
That's that aspect of kind of like a stand-in, right? Like somebody who's really not there. Like they're not 100% in it, and they're just kind of there to be there. Not because they want anything out of it or because they want to be there. They're just basically, they're a stand-in without being a stand-in.
Yes.
It's kind of a difficult thing for the team aspect too, because if I'm just a member on the team and not the captain, and I think it's especially frustrating for the captain. But if I'm looking at overall and I'm just another player on the team that's putting in all this time, and I see one of my players that is only just showing up on the games and they're missing all the practices and things like that, and I get it, life gets in the way kind of thing, but if I'm looking at that and saying this is what's expected of me, but this guy doesn't have to do that, it really kind of destroys the entire dynamic of the team, because then it becomes, well, he's not doing it, so why should I have to? I would rather just be playing Dota than go through these different exercises that we do. And it's a tough spot, especially for a captain to be in. I've been a part of that. Welshie, I know I'm pretty sure that you've had to deal with that a little bit this season. Jamoke, I imagine when you're captain of PSGS that you've dealt with things like that. Like, we all know that this kind of thing occurs. And there's the idea of, yeah, maybe you shouldn't be on the team. But the other thing I think is like trying to figure out, okay, what's the main issue? Are we just burned out? Are we just not enjoying? If it's something where we're just not enjoying because there's a deep-rooted problem, then it's something where we need to take a deeper dive into and figure out, okay, well, why are you feeling this way? What do I have to do as a captain in order to either communicate better with you or really solve any issues that might be lingering that haven't been brought up? Communication is so massive in this aspect because you have to figure out what is the actual underlying problem and then solve it. And that's on the captain. And that's honestly, for a captain, is really exhausting. But when you have that clear picture of what communication is and really that bit of background in making your team understands how important it is, I think it really lightens the load on the captain of understanding, okay, here's where things are. We express kind of the way that we feel, and there's like an open atmosphere in order to discuss that, and it solves a ton of those issues.
Yeah. And I think that's where having that rapport is so important, because when you do approach someone and ask them those questions, if you have the rapport built up, they know it's not coming from a place of like malice. It's, coming from a place that's, from care, concern, It's not like confrontational, you know what I mean? And it's important that they know that you're okay with whatever they have to share that's on their mind. And that's difficult to achieve.
Yeah, and it takes a lot of respect that needs to be earned from yourself as a
Mhm.
captain as well, because they need to understand that, hey, we're not doing this in order to get at you or throw blame. For example, one of the things that I did today, I spent about 3.5 hours doing, is going over a replay and breaking down each individual's performance
Mm.
um, in this particular game,
Mhm.
writing down what I felt, issues that I saw. For me as a captain going into next season, I feel like it's important that if we're not playing my Dota, then
Mm.
like we all need to be on the same page, and it just kind of outlines. And sometimes when you throw that out and give that to somebody, they can take it in one or two ways. One of, hey, this is really, really helpful stuff, which I did get as for feedback. But there's the other way of saying, well, why are you picking on me?
Mm.
And it's not necessarily, hey, I'm picking on you. It's we're trying to better the team and things along those lines. But if you don't have that relationship, you don't have the trust from your team and the understanding that I'm not here to attack you, I'm here to build us
Mhm.
for the future. Um, Once you have that, it becomes easy to talk about that stuff. But that respect level is kind of a hard thing to get initially, which is why I
Mhm.
tend to go towards people that I know that I have a previous relationship with when I'm finding and building a team. Um, and kind of building up from there. Because if I just get like, say, I invite you on my team, you've never talked
Mhm.
to me before, and I start telling you, hey, I don't like how you did this, this, and this, you're probably going to look at that of, hey, screw this guy. Like, he doesn't know what he's talking about, or he's just picking on me, especially if you
Mhm.
don't know that I'm doing it for everybody on the team. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I also want to jump in there. Is that's also an issue when you're forming a team and you, as the captain, and you might not be the highest MMR player on the team,
Mm.
because then people start
Yeah.
throwing, well, I'm a higher MMR than you. What do you know? Why should I take your advice?
I
That is
think
Welcome to
that
Pot of Greed.
Hey yo,
Lowest MMR since the beginning.
Damn right. Captain's got to be lowest.
think that's where like approaching the role as a captain as a facilitator can really like be an advantage, right? Because if there is a big disparity of like MMRs in a team, and if you're the captain and you're not the highest MMR, like there is that position of authority of the person with the highest MMR. But I think people who are playing in competitive Dota, whether you're 3500 or a 6K, even though the 6K has more skill, there's enough understanding on both about, potentially where things like might have gone wrong. And I think that if one person from either role picks up like this person wasn't doing that very well, the person who wasn't doing well probably knows that too, right? So it's less about like pointing out like, hey, you specifically did X, Y, and Z wrong, and more like, hey, like what do you feel like went well? What like do you think you played well? What do you think went well? And what do you think went bad? And so often there's this complete continuity for the most part, between those
So
things.
it's about telling them not really like, hey, here's all the ways you fucked up. It's more about, hey, what do you think you did great? What do you think you did poorly? And how do you think you could improve on those poor things? Like, what do you think you did bad?
Absolutely, yes. It's about um
It's about making it almost introspective, not this like, not this talking to, right?
that was very astute, exactly. And so often I wish that I did like clinical counseling like instead of my route through like industrial psychology, because you're totally right in the fact that it's all about making it about facilitating conversations that are as easy to have as possible, um while not being confrontational. And like how can you use those conversations as a way to develop that rapport, develop that trust, and like maximizing all the communication that you have with the people that you're interacting with. It's so cool.
Absolutely. It's very interesting to see like the parallels that can be drawn between just simple things like coaching in Dota and these sessions that we're
Mhm.
talking about of this, and even just real life work examples, like you said, right? Like, hey, you fucked
Yeah.
up this report. And it's like,
Yeah.
it's like, well, I think you could have done some things better here. What do you think you could have improved on? What do you think you did good on the report? What do you think you did bad? And the same thing goes here, right? I can
Yeah.
tell you, hey, you're crap at offlane. Or we could just go like, hey, what do you think you did good in lane? What do you think you did bad? Like, where were your mistakes? Let's just go to your mistakes. You tell me what they are.
Yeah, and from the perspective of like applied industrial psychology, like a manager doing that is like the worst thing they could possibly do. Like just straight, saying someone effed up, and I mean that's horrible. And going beyond that, it's so destructive to the individual receiving that. It's crazy.
There's a balance to that too. I shouldn't say balance, maybe that's wrong. But it's important to note that you bring up like the manager saying, "Oh, this is fucked up." Like, there's the understanding when you're a captain. This might be one of the hardest things as a captain. Is there's going to be times where, oddly enough, you're going to get tilted too, and you're going to get upset. And there needs to be the understanding when you're a captain that whatever you do is amplified 100-fold when the rest of the players see it. So it's important as a captain, you work hard to keep your cool so that you don't say things like, well, this is fucked. And one of the things that we used in Pot of Greed, and we've used for lots of seasons, is we always dictated somebody to be PMA guy. For the captain, and especially like a shot caller, that's hard to do all the time. So
You can't wear every hat on the team, right? Sorry, just wanted to...
Right. Oh, 100%, you're correct. And what I did was I dedicated, when I was the captain, I dedicated or delegated that role to Welshie, where he was our PMA guy. When things would get tough and people would kind of get a bit frustrated, Welshie's job was to make sure, hey, spirits are high. When this season, when Welshie took over as captain and I was brought in against my will, I took on that role. As he took on the captain, I was the one who was working to be more PMA and going on things of just making sure, hey, we're not arguing, we're not bickering, things can be discussed later, but just being freaking overly positive. Because if there's something wrong and we're in the heat of the moment, and if you dwell on it, then things aren't going to be good. It's not going to look good in the office per se. So you want to make sure that you can talk about things closed doors when the stressful situation is over, and then move on and move forward. So now, I'm curious, what kind of results when you're doing like that training, kind of get back to it, what kind of results are you looking for? Like what indicates to you progress while you guys are doing that communication training?
In the context of like the actual training itself, like outside of the game, I'm looking for just general, just like positive, constructive, just social interaction. Like they're engaging with, the team's engaging with one another and they're engaging with the training seriously. And they're really talking about the training at more of a meta level, as far as like they understand like how it's helping, and they're able to talk about it, like at the meta level of like, no, we need to, talk more about X, Y, and Z for these like, social things that we've come to learn like actually help us. I think that's really rewarding for me to start to see them talk about like at that meta level context. But then as far as the actual like end game, the most important thing that I look for is just like complete engagement in any context or in any like situation that the game might be in, right? Because it's so easy to be positive, communicate well, to be just having fun, having a good time when you're pup stomping or you're winning. But I think it's so easy for any team just to be positive, be constructive, whatnot, when the team's winning. And all the challenges arise when your team starts losing or your team starts facing true challenge. And that's where true colors come out. And that's where teams can start flaming, blaming, becoming super toxic. So in my context, is the entire team individually and collectively completely still engaged in a game that we might be getting stomped in? And how are we communicating with each other in the moments where it is the most intense?
High stress situations is really when colors show. Yeah.
I wanted to ask you talked about like in-game communication, and I think we relatively all know kind of what that looks like. But what are these things out of game that you do? Like, what does this actually look like? Can you give us some examples?
Yeah, so it's really interesting because even with some of the actual like professional teams that I've had interviews with that I've spoken to, and perhaps you guys might even have this like perspective now where it's like this super enigmatic thing where it's super like glasses, big brain, hoity-toity, like training that doesn't really even like make sense and somehow just miraculously like makes everything better. But the really funny thing is like it's so like exoteric. Like the training itself, like basically to introduce everything, the first step with any good like communication training in the context of what I do as well as like in the corporate world is just a generic stock, out of the book, just like general communication training. And in that people learn why is communication important, how communication works like in the human brain, and things that can improve like in work, outside of work, whatnot, just like in general, like the role of communication and why it's important and how can you make it better, right? And then from there you kind of go into more specifics. So I guess there's that just general communication training, but in the context of what I do, I kind of break it down into these two psychological constructs. Do you mind if I briefly touch on these?
Oh man, hey,
Yeah.
you're running the show, man. We're here for you, buddy.
So there's the transactive memory systems, and then there's the shared mental models. And the transactive memory system is basically the group or the team's expectation when it comes to who is gathering what information and who is communicating what information, how that communication is kind of done, right? And that's very niche and like team centric, focus on like team by team. And then shared mental models is how well the team is working on kind of like a collective status. And what I mean by that is like each player has like their own individual game plans, and a individual game plan is still really important because you're playing the hero, you're buying the items and whatnot, right? But like how in sync is your game plan with the rest, with like the game plan of like the collective and the rest of the team, and how well is that collective game plan actually, like what's the congruency? So if us four are on a team, right? If I were to like describe like what's our win condition, what's our strategy, if we were to be taken in separate rooms and just spoke out, articulating like what that looks like, teams with very cohesive, strong shared mental models, like that's going to be super super together. So I'm constantly developing my own game plan that's playing into the team's game plan. So I guess through the scope of transactive memory systems, I do a training that I like to call the critical information conversations. And during this, the team basically sits down and I ask them. And again, this so much of this skill set comes from this kind of the scholastic field of clinical counseling. But I basically just facilitate a conversation where I ask the team, what is important for us to know? And that might be when the enemy hero that we're laying against, or when the core that we're laying against hits level 6. Because the Dawnbreaker hits level 6, that's an immediate thing that needs, that everyone needs to know. So, we talk about that. So it's just literally just a conversation. It's really all it is, like what information is critical for us to know. And this can be broken up into different points of the game. So one day we might just do the laning stage, mid game, late game. But then we also talk about who communicates that, that information, in the context of like bottom or, off lane, is it going to be the position 4 that kind of looks to gather that information and communicate it? Or is it going to be the 3? And the reason why it is so just adaptive and team centric is because every team is different, and it's a real disservice to kind of approach to like build a model for this and just like, force that model on like any one team, right? Because in some lane pairings, that responsibility, like, it's better for it to be shared. And in others, maybe if there's one guy who's a lot higher MMR, he's gonna, totally take the lead on this, right? And it's just all about what's feels good, what's working, and like kind of what the team wants. And yeah, I mean, the team's playing together, they're in, the games, they're experiencing everything. So you'd be surprised on just how well people are already in the loop about all this, and just having a conversation about it just brings like this thing that I haven't ever even thought about. Like, we're now like verbalizing this, and you'd be amazed by just how easy it is for people to hop on board and start having really good conversations about this. And next thing you know, that's kind of how you set these expectations on who's communicating what, and then you could hold each other accountable, and almost gauge that as a different performance metric, like in out of itself. And I could also talk about kind of the shared mental model side, but I want to give some time to like potentially expand on everything I just said about that.
The thing that stuck out the most to me during that was the idea of if you separated everybody into different rooms and asked them what is our win condition. And I think that's an interesting conversation to have just with any team, whether you've been playing together for ages or if you're just brand new. Because I think what it does is from each individual's perspective, whether it be position 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5, like these are all different people playing different roles that are vastly different from each other. What are they seeing, and what on their mind is, well, the win condition, and how cohesive is the team in understanding? If nothing else, what it does is it forces a team to think about that aspect. Jamokin, you've talked about this before, in the idea of it's important for your team to identify certain things along those lines, and being able to identify what is needed in order to win a game. And it's important that each person understands their job in order to achieve that goal. So that stuck out to me. I thought that was phenomenal.
Yeah, that sounded very PSGS-y. Not to like toot our own horn, but like that is really how we always try to approach these situations. Actually, I'm gonna go on a little story. Back in the day when we had our old mid dedicated, we just started working on communicating this and like how we kind of wanted to play the game, and just elaborated on these kinds of things. And one game I said, I just need you to tank up. Like, I need you to tank. Like, it was, we went through the game, we talked about it, we looked at the draft. We're like, next time we run this draft, I need you to tank up. He's like, all right, I got it. I understand. Next game, first item, harder to ask. I'm like,
is this the DK?
This is the DK, yeah.
I knew exactly what game this was, too.
So this was the Heart of Tarrasque Dragon Knight.
Hey, he fucking did it.
He did it. I'm pretty sure it worked, bro. No, but like, I was like, okay, like, yes, tank up, but not first item Heart of Tarrasque tank up.
Oh,
let's look at these. And he's like, okay, got it. And then I was like, all right, but now I need you to kind of hit towers. He's like, understood. Desolator. I'm like, okay, well, let's go back. We need you to tank up. Then I need you to hit towers. Let's look at how we do this. And like, I slowly went through this with him, and like we collectively worked on this as a team, so that eventually we always knew, like, roughly what our roles were in the game, and like what items we needed, what abilities we needed, what heroes we needed to get these things done. And so eventually it just became so natural for the team. Everything just flowed really nicely. And that's why PSG's season 32 was probably the best contender team to ever play.
Second best.
Best.
Second best.
Oh, well, let's
Second
go.
best.
Let's
That's 2-1.
Let's cue it up. Let's cue it up.
But I want to go ahead and we're going to stop here. And we're going to continue this on. We're going to make this a two-parter. We are not getting rid of Scurvy yet. So thank you guys for listening. We're going to continue this as a part 2 next week for week 15. Thank you guys once again, and get ready to hear some more Scurvy Dog next week.
Bye.